Let's get started. For just one more time, I'm Paul Krofssik with Digital Watchdog, and we're going to be going over our 5 megapixel low profile IP camera, little setup information, what it comes with, the little specs, how it reacts in spectrum. So hope you enjoy it. And like I said, we're going to record it. We're going to have a Q&A at the end. So if you got a question for me, go ahead and ask. So when talking about these cameras, whoops, sorry, mouse in the right spot. When talking about these cameras, these are our low profile cameras, and they're not a varifocal. So they're a fixed focal length lens in them. So we have a 4 millimeter, a 6 millimeter, and an 8 millimeter. Okay, the one I'm going to show you some pictures of is a 4. And they're designed obviously for specific situations. You might have a camera, you just want to look at a doorway, you want to get a good tight shot on it. You can use the 6 or 8 millimeter lens, and the 4 gives you a good area, especially on a 5 megapixel camera, because it kind of matches the 4:3 aspect ratio of a 5 megapixel camera versus if you had a 2.8, things start looking a little stretched and stuff like that. And also 4 millimeter works better with your IRs, there's less reflection and stuff like that. Also H.265, so it'll use up between 10 and 50% less hard drive space. Our Starlight Plus for color and super low light, and IP66 and IK10 impact resistant, so use it outside, less likely to get damaged by vandalism because of the IK10 impact resistance. If you notice, I've got the part numbers down here. So the WI4 is the 4 millimeter, WI6 is the 6 millimeter, WI8 is the 8 millimeter. And then we can look at some other basic specs. The sensor size, 30 frames a second. It's got true wide dynamic range in it. So it's actually taking 2 pictures and putting them together, allowing you to have greater light and color depth on the picture, so you can see from a dark area inside to out. 50-foot smart IR, our 3D DNR noise reduction, which is great again at low light, and true day night with a mechanical IR cut filter versus some kind of software trick to make it do an electronic, to make it do a IR cut. So what comes in the box? Well, obviously the camera, installation guides, the tools. If you use a lot of Digital Watchdog cameras, you probably have 500 of these Allen wrenches, some screws, plastic anchors, the mounting plate, test monitor cable, so you can plug this in. Now the test monitor plug is inside here, and it comes out as standard CVBS, so it works even on an old test monitor. Instructions for using the moisture absorbers, we actually have a instruction on where to put them, how they go inside the cameras, your mounting template, and then some mounting bolts and screws, I think more for a ceiling type install. And if you look, you got where your test monitor cable goes. You got your alarm ins and outs, of course, your RJ45. This shows, kind of an exploded view going into a ceiling. But if you look here, it's a little plastic cover. There's a plastic cover on the lens. And when you're all done installing it, you got it aimed pretty well because, of course, you've got the camera off. You got it aimed pretty, where you want it. You take the camera, put the screws in, tighten them up good, and then take that thing off, because that actually covers our clean view coating, which keeps, let's say, raindrops, if it lands on the lens, they won't sit there and get dirt on them and stuff like that. That forces the rain to just drip off the bottom of the dome. So the dome cover stays cleaner longer, requires less maintenance than cameras that don't have it on there. And this is like an exploded view, of course, it going through like a ceiling, those little nuts and bolts. But of course, it comes with that mounting bracket too, so you can mount it anything and then snap it in. So some of the wiring, of course, it can run on 12 volts, but I think 99.99% of you guys use PoE to power it. So it's at 7.2 watts, so it's class 3 PoE, which is fine. It'll work on almost any PoE switch, except for something that's, I guess, junky. And the 12-volt power can, of course, be used for some sort of backup, right? The PoE goes out. Your camera could still be powered up, which we'll talk a little more about why you would need that later. And then, of course, you've got your alarm ins and your alarm outs on the camera, so the camera can be triggered to do something, or something happens and it can be triggered. So good set of features. Also audio in, audio out. So, and with Spectrum now supporting two-way audio, maybe you don't want to record the audio, but want to talk, yell at someone back and forth, you know, while you're watching on camera, maybe not a bad trick that it can do. So one of the setup features is, of course, our IP Finder software. Sorry, I'm just going to move a window kind of out of my way. That is. So our IP Finder software is good for a bunch of things. Number one, allows you to change the passwords, IP addresses, and update the firmware on almost all our cameras. There's some older models that I don't like this very much, but you can go in and do a bulk IP address. You got 30 cameras. You know, you're starting at, you know, 192.168.0.10 for your cameras, let's just say, so you can go 10 to 30. Put it in there and it'll update the IP addresses on all of them. You can also do a bulk password assignment. As cybersecurity, network of security gets more and more intense, stuff like this is great because it allows you to change it to a strong password. There is a built-in user called admin, and this is what it allows you to change. And there is a default password, admin, but it doesn't let you do anything but change to a strong password. Okay, so this thing initially logs in, goes in, changes it to your strong password, and then of course you've got to remember your password. The IP Finder, of course, will find different, you know, all our different cameras. Look for version 4.4.7. If you use one of the part numbers from here, we have the IP Finder tag to each one of our cameras. You can also go to the camera web page. Okay, reboot the camera, even send the camera back to factory defaults as long as you have the correct admin username and password. You can set a static IP in here, so you got one or two cameras, don't really need the bulk IP assignment. You can go to this spot here and change your IP address, subnet mask, gateway, and if you're using it, DNS. Oh, once again, there we go. So this is the camera's setup web page. Okay, and so if you have your username and password changed, it'll let you see this screen, and it'll ask you to install DLC. Don't bother with installing this DLC 32-bit, and the way they change stuff in web browsers, you know, depending on your web browser, it may not work. Just go to HTML5, which will give you an MJPEG view from the camera and allow you to go in and check the alarm inputs triggering, the relay out. You can test the relay out to trigger. Check the audio in the camera, okay? And then, I mean, you can close this or jump into setup. So this is what the setup web page looks like, all right? But I don't really recommend now, especially since really 3.2, but 4 and 4.1 especially, you don't really have to do setup on the camera. Once you have the IP address set, you can do all the setup from Spectrum. Okay, now those of you guys who read my 4.1 webinar, you can even do our cameras, which we'll be releasing shortly, that have what's called our intelligent video in there. You'll be able to do that setup from inside the window in here. So I'd say to you, go to Spectrum, do your setup, do a right mouse button click, and first thing I would do is change the codec to H.265. Okay, it's still defaulting to H.264. I think we're gonna have either a firmware or an update in Spectrum that'll force H.265 in the camera. So right now you change it for both streams. Okay, so we have the second stream setting right here, and your primary stream, change it to H.265, and both you just get the benefit, like I said, of savings. Could be 10%, could be as high as 50%, depending on the situation and the amount of activity in front of the camera. So once we're in there, we can go over here and click our support for a web page, and then we're in the web page. You can see actually didn't change it to H.265 yet, but go in here and we can change our frame rate, our GOP, which is our group of pixels, which profile we use, bit rate, and some other settings. So just going to go down here to be able to set this up. So you can go in here, change this. These are actually two kind of important. I highlight them in almost every webinar, just in case there's new people in here, and there's always new folks in. And they are down here. One's called Smart Bitrate Control, and one is the extension option. Okay, and we'll see what they do here. So you can go in here, of course, change the resolution of the camera. You can start at 5, go all the way down to 720p. I don't know why you do it, but there. You can change the frame rate there if you want, but Spectrum will control it. But then these guys, I would set to CVBR frame rate priority, and then SVCT on. Okay, and the reason for that is the SVC is a standard in H.264, and it's part of H.265 that does like a layered coding. And so there's subset of the bit stream. So there should be any problem with bandwidth. Okay, it can actually reduce the bandwidth required to get it through by dropping a few packets here and there, but allowing the full video to go through. So it reduces bandwidth and allows you to either maintain frame rate priority and quality priority. And we're into seeing what's going on, seeing all the activity. So I like frame rate priority over quality priority. And also the frame rate priority is actually a smaller, reduces your, if it needs it, it reduces your bandwidth. Okay, so just keep that in mind. I would just turn those on. Actually asking to see if we can get them turned on from the factory, but right now you got to turn them on. And then of course in here, you can make your adjustments for your saturation and brightness and all that stuff. And these are just minor tweaks you can do, sharpness. You don't need to go crazy, because what will happen is, of course, you'll have everything be super green or super blue or whatever. I kind of overdid it there to give you an idea on how it works. Exposure is for the amount of light it's going to emulate and look at the screen and make sure it's exposed properly, so nothing is washed out or nothing is too dark. And there are 3 settings: spot, center, and average. Okay, I find spot to be the best if the camera is indoor, because you generally have darker areas and lighter areas. Whereas if the camera is outdoors, I'm not saying there's not going to be dark areas, light areas outdoors, average seems to work better outdoors. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Exposure level is the max amount of exposure, the max amount of, I guess in photography, the ISO, but light it will deal with. So you're setting a max level. So if you wanted to say, I know it's going to be dark, but there's going to be some street lights, I want to keep it in color, so I'm going to maybe crank this up just a little bit. Usually, I think default is this one, 126. You can go up like to 10 or more percent, so you can have 15 points either way to it, and it'll work fine. So just keep that in mind. Again, you know, for every situation, the lighting is different, so you do have to tweak a little bit. The factory settings usually are very good. Okay, I of course overdid it there, but it's not going to change anything really, because if you have enough light, that exposure setting is not going to make a big difference. As the light gets lower and lower, you're then saying, okay, we're going to allow more light to be put into the scene. And then of course we got slow shutter, which allows you to go, of course, and set how long the shutter's open to let light in. Okay, so again, dark situations, it'll allow the shutter to open up longer, but during the day, of course, there's plenty of light. It doesn't need to do that. As it gets darker and darker and darker, then the slow shutter will kick in, and you can set the maximum amount here. There's also a gain limit, which from the factory is set to max, and I would just leave it at max. There's no reason not to tweak it out, you know. And then day-night settings are as they are. You've got auto, day, night, and then of course schedule. Okay, so the schedule allows you to go in and set a time. It's going to go to day and it's going to go to night. And the reason for this is, of course, is you might have a camera underneath in a dark spot a little bit, and then that schedule allows you to just set the schedule saying that, hey, at 7 o'clock at night really starts getting dark, so we're going to switch over to black and white because it's underneath, because it might not switch on in the morning, you know, because there's not enough light there, vice versa. So, or you might have a street light pointing at it and it's keeping that sensor saying, hey, there's enough light here, I'm not going to switch over to color just yet. So there's several reasons why you'd want to use the schedule. The backlight compensation, of course, is wide dynamic range. It's true wide dynamic range, works very well. Again, I only would use it on indoor setting. There's no reason to turn on outside. It's meant to give you the effect of seeing indoors in a darker area and then seeing outside in a light area, or vice versa, light to dark. So keep that in mind. When turn it on, doesn't need to be on the outside. And then white balance. So this is one I've played around with a lot with the cameras, and I'll tell you this. These settings here, I'll just scroll back just a hair. It's usually tough for me to do that. These settings here, auto is very good. You can just leave it at auto. You don't have to tweak it. But if you do have a camera that is outdoors and the area is unusually dark, doesn't get a lot of ambient light, the 65 or 7500K seems to have a little less noise in it. And I think that maybe just because of the color profile, it's closer to red versus, blue or white, which is these other colder ones. So I would just keep that in mind as far as that goes. Again, when you're doing it, again, each camera is pointing at different stuff. Usually, I would say 90% of the time you can keep them at factory, but there might be something saying, hey, maybe there's some way I can just, improve this, make it look a little better, make the color of someone's jacket more recognizable. And then we're going to flip over to image enhancement. And image enhancement has a couple settings in it, including 3D noise reduction, which that's Barry, which helps us, again, in low light situations. Right now, there's no need for noise reduction. But as it gets darker and darker and darker, more noise will appear, especially if we have our exposure up high. And so you turn it on. You can max it out if you want. I would say setting 7 or 8. And I have this camera upside down, so I have it flipped and mirrored so it looks right, and you can read the license plate of the vehicle there. If not, it'd be backwards and everything would look odd. So, again, that 3D noise reduction is not going to affect this image. It'll affect the image that's in the dark. And then, of course, flickerless, if you're dealing with, mostly with, if you had this camera over in Europe and they're at 50 hertz versus 60 hertz, again, leaving it at factory, you're fine. So let's go over here. Why are we saving that? Oh, I think it just replayed. There we go. Sorry. So under network, we've got our network status. And again, I'm just going to pull that back. I should have had it pause there longer. This tells you the status of the system right now as far as IP address, subnet, mask, gateway. So my gateway is 192.168.254.254, 192.254.64, and so on. Okay, and then of course the ports I am using and its MAC address. So it gives you that now. You can go into the settings and switch it from dynamic to static. You see by default it goes to 1.80. You can put in whatever IP scheme you want in here. Auto IP, this is turned off on the factory. This goes hand in hand with UPnP. It just allows it to be recognized. Okay, we actually have it turned off from the factory just because it's almost never used. But you'll see this. This is what's called an PIPA address, and it's sort of a fake IP address, the thing we'll put out. But because of the way these things are installed most of the time, you're taking and putting a camera. You're putting a camera. Apologize, my phone started buzzing in my ear. Taking your cameras and putting them on their own IP scheme. Okay, you got your own IP scheme, whatever it is, and they're on their own switch. And then off a Spectrum server, they've got their own Ethernet port, and they're going there, and all their traffic is staying around there. So they don't need to do any of these other things like auto IP or UPnP and stuff like that. And so we've been turning them off, and you actually may see them disappear from the menu as we take them out, as we, whether they have a security risk or something like that. So you may see some of this stuff change a little bit. This is, of course, OnVIF, which we have turned on, and we have it at its highest level. UPnP off. You can turn it on, give the camera a friendly name, but I mean, UPnP, really hit its peak, and it's, you know, with printers. You want to be able to plug a printer in. It was plug and play, you know, or in the case, because of the way Microsoft implemented it, plug and pray that it worked. But you can go in and plug it in and it'll work. It's not a bad system, but we just leave it off from the factory, give it a friendly name. So if this was a printer, it would be like, you know, South Copier or whatever, or printer in someone's office, Paul's office printer, whatever. You could give it a name and you'd know where it was at. But not a great idea for cameras. So DDNS, we do have a DDNS built into this. You can use a public DDNS. We have a couple built into it. You go in, register it. But again, because these are on a private network, let's use Spectrum, let's use Cloud, and we don't have to have DDNS names for our cameras. We do have FTP in it also. They can actually stream data to a remote FTP website. We have email settings in here. Okay, and then this is actually one you guys may be interested in researching to see if you want to implement it in some ways, and that's SMNP. So it stands for Simple Network Management Protocol. It's a standard way for hardware and software from any manufacturer, whether it's a Cisco or Microsoft or Juniper Networks or what's the other ones? The big Sonic Wall, and just requires a few basic components and very little overhead. And you can manage all your network endpoint devices for health. Okay, get information from them. You know, pull in things even like temperature from a device. Am I working? Stuff like that. So again, I would, you know, research it, see if it's something you may want to implement, because you can set it up so you can have that part of the system contact you if there's something going on at the network level. Okay, you can get a lot of information from Spectrum. When we talked about 4.1, we have the new health section in there. You can have alerts sent on these health things, but using SNMP, not hard to set up. You might have some little more, you know, give you a little more information, especially on big installs, installation of cameras. I mean, there might have been a hiccup in April during the peak of sort of the COVID thing, but now installs, especially big camera installs, are really picking up. So 100, 200, 300, 400, 500. I know we have installs up there with thousands of cameras, and they use stuff like this to manage these devices. They just want to know, is the device working? They get a ping saying yes or no. They go out, look at corroded cable, something like that. It's not getting power, switch point, whatever. So it's just important to see if you want to implement it or not. So then we can look at the RTSP information, how it works, who's connected. So you can get an idea on what's going on with your camera. It even supports multicasting and supports QoS. So you can give the packets in here higher or lower priority on your, you know, on your network IP system. So I'm only going to go over a couple things in here. There's a relay output, okay, in here, so you can actually change whether it's normally open, normally closed. Now you have motion built into the camera, so I'm going to recommend to you to turn that off, because the Spectrum motion detection is much better than the built-in motion detection of any manufacturer's camera. Okay, so the simple, you know, pixel change, whatever, you know, and I think some VMSs even want you to use the in-camera motion detection because it cuts down a little bit on the load on the VMS. We encourage you to use the VMS Spectrum motion detection there. So I actually recommend turn it off. Uses up a little bit of CPU power in the camera, and just keep it off. And there's even a temperature. So if the camera gets over a certain temperature, can send you some alerts. And of course, this is the Spectrum motion setup. So you can set up different areas. Some are higher. So next to the car here, it's higher. This tree moves around a lot, so it causes unnecessary motion. This one, I don't want it to record if it's moving, but if someone walks by it or something like that, it'll still do it. And of course, the clouds up here, just areas of no motion, just to cut down on your, you know, motion area and what you're doing, and, you know, save a little hard drive space, which is what you'd be doing at the camera, but you'd have either less areas or less the ability to tweak it. So we just say use the Spectrum motion detector don't bother within the camera, even for our cameras. And we're getting a question coming in at the end. Okay. We're gonna, anonymous attendee, I'll try to answer that for you at the end. Let's see, go back over here. So we can go in here, I can go change motion areas, I can make them less sensitive, more sensitive, all by these little boxes in here, rather than using the camera's onboard motion detection. So take that whole area, so if the trees are going or something like that, it's just not going to record. You know, one or two of these bushes are really wiggly in the wind, just to save a little hard drive space or give me the pertinent information I want from the motion detection. So you can use it, you know, several different ways. And by the way, this is saved. Spectrum has a backup utility, and these settings are all saved. So should you have to, for some reason, do something with your server, you can back up and restore the settings for these specific cameras, these specific setups. So built into the camera is, of course, we have our security section, our RTSP authentication, our IP address filtering, and we also support HTTPS, including having all the certificates are already in here, already activated, so you can actually do HTTPS connection to the camera, okay, for even higher security. And we've disabled from the factory SSH settings in here. And then, of course, system information allows you to look at system diagnostic, like what's going on inside the camera. Firmware updates, we can push firmware updates from here, and even go to a website. And if we had a later firmware, it would say, hey, you got later firmware or not, if the camera can talk to the internet. If not, use the IP finder. Change time zone, I will say in all my trainings and this stuff, always make sure the time in the camera is correct and you're on the same time zone. You can have it set synchronized with the time server on the internet or synchronized with the local computer, which would be your server. You'd start this on the server for the most part, and you would get the correct time, and you'd be able to go in and make sure everything's right. Daylight savings time, of course. You can, of course, create users, add users. And in here is also stuff for your logs. So you can go in and actually look at the logs of the camera. I'm going to push this forward a little bit because I want to show the logs. So let's say you got something going on. You can change the type of thing you're looking for, the date and time, and saying, I want to see all my exceptions. So anything going on here, hit refresh, and network disconnected, illegal login detected. So like connections disconnect, you know, probably need pulling the cable out of it. You can factory reset it, but leave the network settings the same, or you can reboot the camera. Okay, so there's a lot of little things in here. Again, you can tweak the camera, but the set the time, very important. I'll nag everybody about that. Set the time on all your devices so they're correct. So I want to talk a little bit more about a sort of part of our Spectrum 4.1 update, and I want to talk about OS information. So we now support Server 2019. I wouldn't run the client on it, but you can run the server in it. It's just that the server OS doesn't have the same support for video and performance and stuff like that as Windows 10 does. So your Windows 10 is your client in Windows, and of course Windows Server 2019. Install the server on there, supports virtual servers. I think they call hyper something or other in there, and VMware and stuff like that. And then of course Ubuntu, client and server. All right. And then tested operating systems. So Windows 7, 8, and 8.1. As we can see, Microsoft has ended support for these guys. 8.1 might still get some support, although Microsoft will send out security updates every now and then. If there's something really big, they will still update Windows 7. I've seen it as recently as, you know, what is it, January of this year, I think. And same thing with the enterprise stuff. So the server OSs, these are, I don't think they end of life them the same way as Windows 10, but if I were putting in new stuff, I would do 2016 or 2019 for anything new I would ask for. I mean, there's some of these laying around. You might have to do some updates to them where they are running all these integrations they wrote back 4 or 5 years ago, and maybe updating a service pack will break the integration, so they may be reluctant to doing some updates. So I would be more of 2016 R2, 2019 R2, and do that. And of course, Linux tested 1604, 1804, and 2004 client and server. Mac OS just client, and it is identical to the regular Spectrum Windows OS. So the person who's using it on a PC at the office they have a Mac at home, they can log in and have the same user experience. And then of course, Raspberry Pi, so we have IoT. It's really for the server version. And of course, you log in from your Linux or your Windows client, stuff like that. So again, good OS information. I'm going to try on any one of my webinars that we have to mention that to give you whatever is going on Spectrum. So this way you can use it better, work on it better, and have a little more understanding of what goes on with it. Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about the DW website. All right, so for this product, we have a product page, okay, that has a ton of information on it. So I got a little zoomed in here so we can talk about DW difference. We can talk about the features, specs, related products, accessories, all the documents, A&E specs, you know, whatever might be there, manuals, quick start guides, all that stuff's buried in there. Whatever the latest software is. So the software will have the firmware update. We don't hide them behind where you got to sign in and, you know, be a DW, you know, whatever. You can just go and download the latest firmware. And we probably will have some exciting stuff for the firmware up on a lot of these cameras coming up very shortly, including some video intelligence. You'll just be able to upgrade the firmware in a lot of our cameras, and they'll have, along with the regular sort of motion detection I tell you to turn off, we're going to have video intelligence in it. And then FAQ brings you to our DW support website, where you can go and type something in, and we probably have the answer to the question you're looking for. We have a dedicated person that works with our tech support guys, and if something comes in, let's just say today, either it's a weird question or a question they've been getting a little bit, they create a document and post it into our support page. So it's really like a good addition. And I actually use it because I don't remember everything. I got to go, how do I get to what's the RTSP stream for this device? We got it there. So next is accessories. Accessories for this camera. We've got a ceiling mount. We've got our converter plate, and all these, by the way, the colors all match on this. Converter plate, corner mount, junction box if you need it, pole mount bracket, and then a wall mount bracket. So, you know, you marry the wall mount bracket with a corner mount or the pole mount. Use a junction box, don't use a junction box, gang box converter. So however you want to set it up. Reminding you to go to our website, https dwuniversity.digital-watchdog.com. Sign up. We have a certification training. It's 8 hours, and also we've added another 3 or 4 hours of our C3 product in there, and we're adding items regularly. And so sign up for that, and you'll be DW certified. Right now, we're not doing the in-person classes. I used to do the in-person classes, done a couple of hundred of them. And right now, for obvious reasons, we're not doing those. But go and get certified. You'll learn something new on those also. So let's talk about compliance. So there's something came out called the NDAA, which is National Defense Authorization Act of 2018. And it singled out several companies, Hikvision, Dahua, Huawei, and there's actually a few others in there. And they're basically saying really can't use these products if you're using either federal dollars or at federal sites. And there's a bunch of other restrictions in there. A couple of others have just happened recently. And so we went through our product line, and we have a list of everything that is NDAA compliant. It's a long list. Hundreds of part numbers in there. We've got a few part numbers. We're working with our factory right now and tweaking them out, making sure we'll be 100% compliant. But it's very important. There's not millions, not billions. There are trillions of dollars in government money out there for different projects. There's just money floating around, and so you don't want to be out of compliance because the camera was $15 cheaper. Or this was, you know, a little less money. Let's just, you don't have to do that. And you'll get asked sometimes too, especially on state products. No, let's talk webinars. So webinars, we've got this one, and then we've got a 4K next week, 4K AHD analog coming up. So we'll be talking about recorders and cameras a little bit on there that are 4K. We have, of course, all our recordings in there, including our Works with Spectrum for video analytics. These ones that are temperature detection. There's one called Thermal Radar, detects fires. Halo, it's vape detecting, and just all kinds of ones in there. So I urge you to go and take a look at those, please. And like I said, we've got a lot of information more coming, and then we should be posting today or no later than Monday our list for September for our different webinars. So with that.